It's lovely to be here with you all, even if it's in this virtual space. And I would like to start with 3 pieces that might inspire our conversation today. Firstly, to add to the acknowledgement of country, I'd like to share a poem by Oodgeroo Noonuccal. Oodgeroo speaks about the displacement that plant and animal and human life might have in a city. And I don't want to disparage city life, but today I would like to share why I have a passion for rural and remote ministry. So this poem is called Municipal Gum. Gum tree in the city street, hard bitumen around your feet. Rather you should be in the cool world of leafy forest halls and wild bird calls. Here you seem to me like that poor cart horse, castrated, broken, a thing wronged, strapped and buckled, its hell prolonged, whose hung head and listless mien express its hopelessness. Municipal gum, it is dolorous to see you thus set in your black grass of bitumen. Oh, fellow citizen, what have they done to us? So Rini, if you might share my first slide. Thank you. So there you'll see one or several gums stuck in the city. I just love that poem. And then secondly, I'd like to share a well-known one by Dorothy McKellar, which we used to sing as school children. And I'll just recite one verse. You probably know this one. I love a sunburnt country, a land of sweeping plains, of ragged mountain ranges, of droughts and flooding rains. I love her far horizons. I love her jewel sea, her beauty and her terror, the wide brown land for me. And for my third piece of inspiration, I'll turn to a story of Jesus. This is from the Gospel of John 1:43 and 45 to 46 from the RSM. The next day, Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." So I'd like us all to come and see today, to reflect on the value, the possibilities, and also the challenges of rural and remote ministry in the Australian context. And if you could stop sharing that slide, thanks. So as you may have heard in the bioinformation, I was brought up in a rural parish and have worked in rural and remote youth, pastoral, parish, diocesan and various chaplaincy roles. But until recently, I hadn't really reflected on that experience, on what is unique or potentially different from urban contexts. And I'm sure that there's a lot of wisdom in this virtual room and for those who'll be watching later on. But I want to share with you today some of my reflections, learnings and experiences. We might start with a question. How does the gospel, the good news, come alive in rural and remote ministry today? In my experience, I would say that the sparks of the Spirit, the word of Jesus Christ, and appropriately, the seeds of the reign of God are truly active beyond city limits. I enter this ministry with the eyes of privilege, of blessing, and not with a sense of lack or even the tyranny of distance that gets talked about. Yes, we have vast spaces in this land, but it gives us a sense of proportion, humility, and wonder across the horizons of God's creation. Yes, we have small populations, but this gives us intimate personal spaces and relationships like those of Jesus' original circle. Yes, we have few established educational institutions or physical infrastructures, but we create flexible solutions to faith celebration and formation that might outlast physical buildings. So I hope that we might not cry, poor me, in the country, or be pitied by the city. We have gifts to offer the wider church, just like that rural backwater of Nazareth. I'd like to acknowledge that there are many varieties of the 3 Rs, regional, rural, and remote, and also isolated communities. But the word community is extremely important. As Pope Francis says in Evangelii Gaudium, we are to follow that original Christian community of missionary disciples that we read about in Acts 4. And the church is also a community of communities. Others will know that we are Christians by our love for each other, as we enact the greatest commandments, to love God and to love our neighbour as ourselves. So Vinny, if you might share my second slide, thanks. So I'll explain that in a second, but according to the dictionary, community is a body of persons who share something, but that could be residents in the same place, or characteristics, values, interests, identity, etc. The communities that we belong to often overlap these days. So I tried to map a few of mine here. I might belong to communities such as those in my postcode, my parish, my charism, my volunteer organisation, my sporting club, my online book group, and the list goes on. In rural and remote life, where few people inhabit a large area, many people intersect across these several communities. So where does the church community fit in? Now, if you could stop sharing that slide, thanks. The church is the pilgrim people of God and not the buildings. It is a community of faith that people may not even know they belong to unless we point it out. They may feel a connection with Christianity through the Catholic school or local binnies, for example, and they may tick Catholic on the census, although as we know that's been getting less. I think it's so important for us to acknowledge this and to take the buildings away from our thinking about church. But here's the challenge. Because I love gathering in the church buildings, parish life and the sacraments. But how do we connect and transform and be transformed by these communities? Why can't we be Christians on our own? And conversely, why should the church care about the other communities that people inhabit? To take the last question first, we as church have something to learn from the selfless concern that rural and remote people have for each other, especially in times of crisis. Actually, right here in Forbes at the moment, we're in flood and so many people are flocking to the SES yard to help with the sandbagging. We can be transformed by noticing Christ-like attitudes that inspire us to do the same. And on the other hand, being Christians together can be transformative for country people as we're taken outside of our small circle of belonging to being part of God's family with those who seem different to us. This year's National Church Life Survey shows that the Australian public most values religion or life transitions, that is, baptisms, weddings, and funerals. So when we have the privilege of celebrating these and any sacramental moments with people, we make the most out of them. For example, I've watched a very meaningful baptism of a young Aboriginal man in a river. In a tiny remote town, the visit of the priest meant a mass in the local pub, followed by a meal there with the community. A colleague of mine does scripture classes via School of the Air and personalised sacramental preparation for isolated farming families. Another colleague, as a rural pastoral worker, acts as a bridge between people and the parish, providing positive experiences for them when they do come. When there are few people in a locality, we try to be all things to all people, as St. Paul says, so that we don't lose anyone by causing harm. For those in formal rural or remote ministry roles, it might be helpful to do the similar exercise that I did to map the communities that you're part of. It's so important to be involved in the life of the community of residents, so much more than just living there. Being part of the local football team or bingo club or knitting circle become not just fun hobbies, but really part of the ministry. Over time, I've learned that I don't need to do everything. I can visit the knitting circle every now and again, but if I'm more at home in the writers group, well, that's okay. What I do find is that people appreciate it and recognise you, knowing that you represent the church and the Christian faith. In more theological terms, is relational and incarnational ministry. You never know when those moments of pastoral care and connection to faith might happen. For example, I'm part of the rural fire service, and without needing to advertise that I'm a sister, people start sharing about their house burning down, or about how to connect with Vinnies, or even start to use the term God bless. And it can be a bit of fun. The other day, the RFS was called out to the school in which I'm a chaplain. It wasn't an actual fire, but when I appeared in my RFS uniform, the students connected me in a whole other way. But this might all sound a bit random, like a badge saying church popping up here and there. But what I aim to do in rural and remote ministry is to connect the dots, to recognise and relate one community to the other. In my current role as a pastoral worker, my mission statement is to support the bishop to serve the faithful of the region in their discipleship with Jesus, to build and strengthen connections with and between God, families, faith community, and local community. So this connecting is meant to be intentional at all times in such ministry. It's a big responsibility and it does take time. The key piece of wisdom I got from a remote parish priest was, several years ago, just be there. It's seeking to be a listening and positive presence among the community, to notice the actions of the Spirit and point them out, using words where necessary. As we all know, relationships take time and effort, but they have wonderful results. When I first arrived in a rural town, people wondered how long was I going to be there. It can be very hard to break into settled cliques or generations-long affiliations. But when we have been around for some time, when people can finally say, you're one of us, then taking initiatives becomes almost easy. I've found that it's so much more difficult in the city to start things, find venues, partners, sponsors, etc. But when you have relationships in a small community, then everyone wants to be involved. For example, we held a special Mass for Reconciliation Week and immediately got the support of the parish, Vinnies, Catholic Care, Catholic Education Office, and the 2 local Catholic schools. It's not all hard work. Just doing what you love doing, along with others in the local area, is good for everyone. I've also been so impressed by the work of our youth ministry coordinator in my diocese of Wilcannia Forbes. I have to say that I did almost the same role previously in a rural remote diocese, and I really struggled. But he has this method of visiting a town and building strong relationships first. Then the youth ministry emerges. He has a rough structure of gatherings, including food, formation, and fun, but it looks different in every different community. And another key word I would use is encouragement. By affirming and encouraging others in their ministry efforts, we all grow. I've also seen the value in having high expectations in rural and remote ministry and valuing education and professional standards in building and communicating our faith in Christ. We now have so much available online to draw on in terms of faith formation, and this has been particularly promoted in the Australian Plenary Council. Although the circumstances may look different, I see rural faith leaders skilling themselves up on evangelisation documents, papal encyclicals, professional supervision, scripture courses, and much more. In our diocese, we have built a functioning Diocesan Pastoral Council and Diocesan Ecology, Peace and Justice Commission. And there are the usual DFC, PPCs, PFCs. A great challenge, however, is that sometimes the same people are drawn on for all of these and more. Rural and remote ministers and the missionary disciples in their area wear a lot of hats. It can be easy for people to be overburdened and stretched beyond their capacity to be effective. I find that I can only be a generalist and not a specialist in anything. Realistically, as Flock Note webinars remind us, Only about 7% of parishioners are the engaged, committed types. And in the Catholic population of 100, that's only 7 people. I don't want to be too rosy, but I'm often accused of that. We are often under-resourced in people, able to implement all the ministry ideas. If we don't value people's dignity enough, we can use them up and they can only leave. We don't have the financial resources of larger populations, and we have to look at church building closures and the like. Our lives can revolve in tight circles without as much contact with the wider world. This can lead to narrow-minded prejudices and fear of change. We can forget that Jesus reached out to and was inspired by the outsiders more than the insiders. And when we value being proud and tough, we can prove hard to help. When other parishes or dioceses offer their services, we prefer the in-person and paper rather than Zoom or electric. But we can thrive in valuing every person in our rural or remote Catholic community as God-beloved individuals with a very important place. We need everyone, and deep down, we usually like to be needed. We appreciate every person's involvement in whatever capacity that might be. In rural and remote places, people will travel whole days to get to events and enjoy spending time in each other's company. We hang around after Mass and chat because there might not be much else happening in town that day. We can pull together to fundraise for a particular project that captures the imagination and strengthens community bonds. We can make the most of what we have. And in the end, that's quite a lot. So I want to finish with a story of some of these themes in practice. About 25 minutes west of here in Forbes, currently underwater, is a tiny farming community called Bajerabong. It couldn't be called a town as there are no shops. About 150 residents are spread out over 136 square kilometres. I fell in love with it at once. My first contact with the community was through my past life in the circus. Who would have thought the Bajerabong school had a circus program and they appreciated some help? So I started visiting about once a fortnight and got to know the lovely little school community. Around the same time, I was shown a letter that had been sent to the diocese by a representative from the Bajerabong Union Church, which is shared across several Christian denominations. It read, "Many Catholic residents of the Bajerabong Coronella area are requesting that Catholic services be held in the Bajerabong Church, depending on the priests and lay preachers being available to conduct services." The letter writer was from the Uniting Church. Soon enough, by getting in touch with a few key people in the community, we were invited to come for a service. By we, I mean a small team of the faithful from the Forbes parish community. Families and individuals were rung all over the district, and on Palm Sunday 2019, we began. At the first liturgy, there were 12 adults and 8 children. We quickly realised that the young ones are a very important part of our ministry, and since then we've always had children's ministers leading liturgy of the word for them outside the little church building. The second crucial addition was the morning tea, which has become something of an institution. So Rini, if you're able to share the next slide. Thanks. There we go. And you can see our setup for the children's liturgy. And that was a bit of a special morning tea for a celebration. We didn't have as much home cooked food that day, but often there's a lot of home cooked food. So since then, COVID and floodwater permitting, we've kept up a monthly Catholic liturgy in the Bajerabong Church. Roughly every third time, a priest or the bishop comes to celebrate a Mass, which they all appreciate. The other times we celebrate liturgy of the word with Holy Communion. At first, I led the services, but since we organised liturgical training in Forbes, we shared the roles around with other lay ministers. Others participate in preparation, music, reading, children's ministry, welcoming, hospitality, and cleaning. Occasionally, when dates coincide with family and clergy, we even have a baptism, which is very special, and you see that in the picture there. Maybe if you could stop sharing, thanks, Rini. The ecumenism is wonderful, and the Uniting Churchwoman rings around the locals every time to let them know that it's on. The church has one big fundraiser a year, in which thousands are raised at a very fun harvest service and auction. And they're the most generous givers on our collection plate per person that I think I've ever seen. I asked some of the attendees about the meaning and value of the monthly liturgy. They spoke about the close location, the hominess, the friendliness, the social aspect, and the satisfaction in seeing the church used and faith passed down to children. One of them gave the highest praise from country folk, saying, "Bloody oath, we love coming here." You can quote that. But it's not just the locals. The volunteers from Forbes get so much out of their own participation as missionary disciples. They go out of their way to say thanks for their involvement in the Bujerabong community. It certainly fits with our understanding of mercy as Sisters of Mercy. From receiving, we give, and in giving, we receive. That, as one of the earliest sisters said, is a glorious thing. So I'd like to conclude by thanking God for the opportunities to minister in rural and remote communities. And I hope that we can share in that privilege for the sake of the good news and the sowing, weeding, and watering of the reign of God. Thank you.